Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Iglesias. I'm the director of the Wheaton Center for Faith, Politics, and Economics. So thank you so much for coming this evening. We have a very special guest tonight, Ed Moy, and he's got a fascinating background. Let me read you some of the things he's done. And he has an extensive background. I think he's one of the few people who's had as many jobs as I've had. And fortunately, he's condensed it to less than a page. But he is a fellow follower of Christ who's been called to minister in the workplace, especially in public service. From 2006 to 2011, he served as the 38th director of the United States Mint, where he led the world's largest manufacturer of coins. Mr. Moy was also a member of the Secretary Treasurer's senior staff during the financial crisis and resulting Great Recession. From 2001 to 2006, Ed was a special assistant to the president for presidential personnel. He was responsible for recommending candidates to the president to serve in the highest levels of federal government. And over dinner tonight, I found out what that meant. What that meant was he would come in daily into the West Wing and brief the president for about 30 minutes on many hundreds of presidential appointees. And he'll get into details, but he'll tell you that the president has about 4,000 appointments to make during their administration. The highest level is a presidential appointment subject to Senate confirmation, and Mr. Moy worked on a lot of those packages. So he also had regular meetings with the Vice President and the White House Chief of Staff. During his service in the White House, he was a member of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Transition Team, so he helped stand up the newest cabinet department, which is Homeland Security. He also helped start and lead the White House Christian Fellowship. His first stint in public service was with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services between 1989 and 1993. He was also director of the Office of Managed Care and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. There, he introduced managed health options to the nation's elderly and poor. Ed has served on the board of Christianity Today International, on the executive advisory board for Seattle Pacific's University School of Business and Economics. He's a policy fellow with the American Conservative Union. He's also co-chair of this year's CPAC, which is Conservative Political Action Council, or Conference rather. He lives in the Washington, D.C. area with his wife Karen, his wife of 33 years, his daughters Noah and Lucy, both adopted from China. So he'll present for about 45 minutes. You can ask your questions. I would request you write them down on the 3x5 card that should be in your aisles there. Raise your hand, and Sami, where are you? And Heidi will bring them up to me, and I will read them for Mr. Moy. So without further ado, please give a warm Wheaton welcome to Mr. Ed Moy.
Thanks for that very warm welcome, David. You know, I used to get a lot of great introductions when I was Mint Director, but I found out that people were saying nice things about me so they could get the free samples at the end of the day. So I know that without free samples anymore, David actually meant what he said, so I thank you for that very kind introduction. I want to answer one question right away, because I commonly get asked this, and a few of you had asked this as I was making my way through the crowd, and that is, what was my favorite thing about being director of the United States Mint? Was it that I turned in one of the first $1 billion profit years that the United States Mint ever had? Was it taking employees voting on us from best places to work from near dead last to near the top over my 5-year tenure? All those things are satisfying, but the most satisfying thing about being director of the United States Mint was I finally got my dad's respect. So let me explain that. He's an old-fashioned Chinese country boy, and when he immigrated here to the United States in the 50s, he really wanted his family to become financially successful. And every time that I was on the verge of making some really big dollars, I would get a call from the White House saying, could you drop everything and come and fix this particular problem for us? And I would do that and just lose out. And, I've made a good living, but never the mega bucks that my dad was really envisioning. And so finally, when President Bush and Secretary John Snow of the Treasury asked me to become the director of the United States Mint, I said, Dad, I want to let you know that the president had decided to make me director of the Mint. And he looked at me and he said, finally, my son has a job where he makes a lot of money. Didn't have the heart to tell him that none of it was mine. I didn't even get a discount off of my products. So I'm really pleased to be here. I wanted to extend a big thank you to David. David and I were served together in the administration of George W. Bush. I have great respect for him and what he was able to accomplish during his time in the administration. I was very excited to hear that he's over here at Wheaton, and I'm very impressed that Wheaton would hire someone with the broad experience that David brings to their job. So thank you very much. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to come and share. So what am I going to talk about? I want to give you some thoughts about faith and public service and what difference you can make, and give you some insight into one Christian's struggle to be faithful in the things that God has brought in front of him, which include public service. So you see on the screen here, this is a typical meeting of presidential personnel, which is full of extraordinary people. That is the Oval Office. You see the vice president on the right and the president on the left. You see the famous Resolute desk in the back of the room. You see me by the Resolute desk. And these are extraordinary people. I mean, just going around, you have Liza Wright, who was a senior partner at Heidrick & Struggles, which is one of the big search firms. She since left this position to found a very large and influential executive search firm. David Clark, who's sitting next to her, is now the executive vice president for American Express over human resources. Next to her is Julie Myers-Wood, who then, after this position, she became the Assistant Secretary for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, which is responsible for all the immigration issues that we're dealing with now. The fellow sitting right next to me, to this stage right, is Eric Motley, who's now head of the Aspen Fellows at the Aspen Institute. Next to him is Tim Griffin, who then became a member of Congress in Arkansas and is now the lieutenant governor in Arkansas. And then you have Andy Card, our chief of staff, who now serves as president of Pierce University. So it was amazing to serve with such accomplished people who then took these high-level positions and did great things with it. And that's what I would like to spend my half hour sharing with you on. So first, a little bit about my background so you get the context of where I'm coming from. And I won't go through this list because David did a great job going through my background. But the salient point that I wanted to get across is I'm the son of Chinese immigrants. My dad fled the communist revolution in China, went back, married my mom, who's from Hong Kong. They came over here. I was born 9 months later after they became citizens, and I grew up in Wisconsin. Went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and through all those years, never got exposed to spiritual things until I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison. And there, by my senior year, I came to a saving faith in Jesus Christ. And there, a very seminal event happened to me that shaped my whole view on faith and work in public service. And that was all the Christians who had helped me nurture my faith journey were so excited that I had committed myself to follow Christ that they called an emergency meeting with me because this was springtime and we were about to graduate, and they got together and made this point to me. They said, Ed, now that you've made the most important decision in your life, now you have to make the second most important decision, and that is, what are you going to do with it? I looked at him and I said, I'm a new Christian. I don't know what that means. Explain it. And he said, well, do you feel called to ministry? I said, I don't know what a call to ministry is. I just became a Christian like a week ago. Explain it. And they said, well, a call to ministry is, do you feel called to become a pastor, a parachurch worker, a missionary? And I took a look at my skill set, and I said, I am bred, my innate being is really good at two things. Taking small things and making them big, and taking things that have gone bad and making them right, applied to a business situation. And then they had all long faces. They said, oh, so you don't hear the call to ministry? I said, no, I don't. And then they said, well, if you're going to go into the secular workplace, let us give you this counsel. Number one is be very aggressive about basically paying and praying. Tithe all the money that you're going to make to pay for those people who are going to go into full-time Christian ministry. Pray for them and offer them your nice house when they're on furlough, and et cetera. And that's one way you make it up. And the other way you make it up is in the workplace, once in a while you're going to get a chance to share the gospel, so don't mess up on that opportunity. That didn't mesh really well until they went into the second part of their argument, which is to say, so you think you're really good at business? And I said, yes. And he said, well, it's easier to be a person of faith if you're in social work or healthcare or education, and much more difficult, if not impossible, to do it in business, politics, or entertainment. That was my answer. So I was incredulous when they made that argument to me. And I went home because even though I was a young Christian, I had been reading the Bible for 4 years now. And nothing in the Bible would make that argument. And so I was very confused when I graduated from the University of Wisconsin. I went out into the workplace because I felt that was where I was called without any of my friends affirming my calling, and kind of muddled until I ran into, so my first full-time job after college was in the executive training program at Blue Cross and Blue Shield, the big health insurer. And we had just hired a new senior vice president of sales and marketing who was targeted to be the next CEO when the CEO retired. And he was hired the same time I was, and so we're in the employee briefing to fill out all our health insurance forms and everything. But the key thing was I had seen him come out of our church that following Sunday. I was going to Elmbrook Church in Milwaukee, in Brookfield, and he was coming out of the same church. And immediately I went up to him and I said, do you remember me? He said, yeah, you're one of my employees like 10 levels down. I said, yes, but more important to me is, are you a Christian? And he said, yes. And I said, and how long have you been a Christian? And he said, for about 25 years. And I said, and how long have you been in the workplace? For about 20 years. And he said, can you share with me your faith journey at work? And he shared with me at that time, and it's something that I continue to carry around with me today, and that is all Christians, without exception, are called to full-time Christian ministry. All Christians, without exception, are called to full-time Christian ministry. And ministry defined as doing something for the glory of God. Yes, you can do that as a pastor. Yes, you can do that as a missionary. Yes, you can do that as a parachurch worker. But yes, you can do that as a nurse. You can do that as an engineer. And yes, you can do that in public service. And having a little bit of contrarianism as part of my nature, I said, if it's impossible, or if the thought was it's impossible to be a Christian in business, politics, and entertainment, those are the three areas I'm going to apply my faith to, and that's informed my journey ever since. So that leads us to the White House. I had an opportunity to serve President Bush from 2001 to 2006 in the White House as a special assistant to the president for presidential personnel. So let me just give you my reality check. In Washington, the people with the most power have the shortest titles. The president, secretary. My title was special assistant to the president for presidential personnel. So you can gather that, I had an influential job at the White House, but I was considerably lower in the totem pole, but it also allowed me to spend regular time with President Bush. As David was explaining, one of the things that job does is in every administration, there are about 4,000 full-time political appointments and maybe about 8,000 part-time commissions, appointments to those commissions, that presidential personnel's job is to advise the president on who he should put in those jobs. And so as a result, I met on a very regular basis with the president and had the ability to basically advise him on who he should put in those positions. Here you see a very interesting meeting. So this, unlike the other slide you saw, that's a typical personnel meeting with the president. But when the president has a high priority problem he wants to solve, it's a much smaller crowd. And so it's me, one of my deputies, Jennifer Cervantes, the head of presidential personnel at the time, Clay Johnson, and the president alone in the Oval Office. What set up this particular meeting? Well, in this meeting, I was talking to the president about who he should nominate as the director of the National Institutes of Health. I don't know if you remember, in 2001, before 9/11, the president had made some campaign statements about the morality of using stem cells. And the director of the National Institutes of Health is the part of government that funds and manages the strategic plan for basic science, basic biomedical science within government. And so whether it's curing cancer or finding a way to address HIV or any of that is overseen by the head of the NIH, and that is ground central for stem cell. And the president had asked me not to go ahead and recruit someone and make a recommendation to him on the director of the NIH until he finished up his policy review on his approach to stem cell, and then he wanted that whatever candidate I'd recommend to have consistent views on stem cell when that person headed up the NIH. Long story short is we ended up deciding on a candidate. His name is Elias Zerhouni, a dear friend of mine. He was the chief operating officer for Johns Hopkins Medical, and he also started Johns Hopkins Research, took it from basically $0 to $10 billion of research each year. And then he took over the medical school when the medical school went from number 1 to number 6, and in 2 years took it from number 6 back to number 1 again. So this guy knows his way around. But the issue was, Elias comes from Algeria and is a nominal Muslim. And stem cell was an area that evangelical Christians had particular concern about. And so the reason why Elias got selected was, unlike the other candidates that we interviewed, who basically who agreed with the president on stem cell from moral terms, Elias agreed with the president based on science terms. So Elias's argument is, instead of saying it's morally wrong to destroy embryos, why do we need to go to a controversial area when we have enough embryonic stem cell material today to do the basic research? Basic research is finding out how it really works. And then after you find out how it works, then you can do all this other stuff. Well, we have enough to do basic research, so why do we need to intentionally destroy more embryos to get additional materials when there's still 20 years of basic science that needs to happen here? Eminently reasonable argument. So what ended up happening was the president made that nomination, and to the scientific community, while they were extremely disappointed that the NIH director was holding back on unlimited embryonic stem cell research, they agreed with the scientific argument, and as a result, the president's policies got done. But the evangelicals and other Christian groups were very upset. So this is a little side story, but I can tell this now that I'm no longer in the administration. The administration's all done. So a couple weeks after that announcement, I get a call from Karl Rove, and he says, Ed, you are going to come with me to the Thursday group. Thursday group is once every month on a Thursday. About 40 evangelical leaders get together to discuss how to influence public policy. And Karl said they are not happy about NIH, and so we're going to go there and listen to them. So Karl and I head off to this meeting, and there in the room, and they were meeting in a hotel room, was a U-shaped seating arrangement, and there were I knew like 35 out of the 40 people just by sight. And Karl and I walk and we stand in the open part of the U, and the question was, why did the president appoint a Muslim to a job where stem cell policy is so critical? So Karl says, he starts off by saying, while we like to get your recommendations, and Ed interviewed them all, bottom line, it's the president's decision, and the way you're presenting it says we owe you a favor, but we actually don't, because in this election, typically 25 million evangelicals come out and vote for the Republican candidate for president of the United States, but because you on your radio program said we're not going to go out and force for this drunken frat boy, and you said to your group that we should stay home on this one, only 11 million came out, so 14 million stayed home, and as a result, we almost lost the election because of your lack of support. So from a political side, we don't owe you a thing. I gotta go. Ed Moy's gonna explain how the president made the decision. And so what struck me was it was explaining the head of the NIH, the Clinton head of NIH, Harold Varmus, was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. The NIH has 19,000 PhDs and scientists working for them. They manage $34 billion of research grants to virtually every single university and college in America. We needed a Nobel Peace Prize winner, a scientific visionary who could strategically say, we should invest in this type of cancer research because it has the chance to really accelerate a cure for cancer versus that cancer research. We also needed someone who was extremely well respected by the community as a fellow researcher, all that stuff. And that's why we ended up with Elias Terhuni. And then two people from the group said, well, why didn't you consider so-and-so and so-and-so? And I said, well, we interviewed these people who were both evangelical believers. And it ended up that Elias Terhuni was much better qualified, because he managed this and did all this research money and so on. And then it came down to, they said, well, we're confused as to why he wasn't picked, even though, he has the right policy on stem cell. I said, well, so-and-so is a primary care physician in charge of a 3-person practice in Montana and does not have a scientific vision, did not win the Nobel Peace Prize or get elected to the National Academy of Sciences in the Institute of Medicine, has never managed 19,000 people before, et cetera, et cetera. And the answer back was, but Ed, we know this person and he loves the Lord. And that's when it just really struck me that we need more Christians in public service who are undisputed experts in the areas that they're in to make a positive impact in government. That at the time that I did this search, there were very, very few Christians who were top scientists noted in their particular fields. And I can go through and go into labor policy and Farm Credit Administration and the National Labor Relations Board and go right through that list and say, there are a lot of Christians out there, but none who meet the criteria to do those large jobs. And so one of my pleas and one of the reasons why I accepted the opportunity to come here is, if you're at all interested in public service, I encourage you to consider it, because public service needs more people like you. I adopted my first daughter in 2006, and as soon as we got approval from China, I went to the president and submitted my resignation. And the president said, I don't want to lose you, so is there something else I can appoint you to that would give you more of the lifestyle that you want in order to raise your child? Because 18-hour work days at the White House isn't conducive to raising a family. So I gave him a list, and then he called me a little bit later, and he said, so it's kind of funny, so the phone lights up, and our phones are old LED phones. And so when the president calls, POTUS lights up on the LED. That stands for President of the United States. 99 times out of 100, when I get a call like that, it's a secretary, and either Ashley or Karen will say, Ed, I got him on the line. He wants to ask you about the Surgeon General. Click, and then he comes on the line. So I see POTUS light up on the LED. I pick up the phone, and I go, yay, Ash, what's going on? Pause. Eddie, it's the president. Ooh. Yes, Mr. President. Sitting here with Jon Snow, and we decided you're going to become the 38th director of the United States Mint. Pause. Eddie, that's what you wanted, isn't it? You had that on your list, when you said you wanted something that's more conducive and makes more money for your family and all this other stuff. Why are you so quiet? I said, Mr. President, when I said I needed to leave the administration for a job that made more money, I meant my own money, not my country's money. So he laughed and he said, okay, you're going to be a great director, but don't screw it up for me. Then he hung up the phone. It ended up to be, so the United States Mint, in short, makes our country's coins. They make circulating coins, they make precious metal bullion coins, and it also makes collector's coins. And it's run like a business. And during my tenure, we went from roughly $2.3 billion of revenue to $4.9 billion of revenue. We broke $1 billion of profit over my 5-year term, which I served 3 years under Bush and 2 years under Obama. But what the interesting thing that allowed me to do was just the period of time that I served, from 2006 to 2011. The financial crisis started happening around 2007, reached a crisis point in 2008, and then we had to deal with the aftermath and quantitative easing and zero interest rates, et cetera, to try to stimulate the economy afterwards. And as director of the Mint, that put me at the big kids table at the Secretary of Senior Staff meetings. And together, once a week, we struggled through all the public policy issues of how to handle the financial crisis. So where does faith come into all that? Well, maybe an unfair way to characterize the decision that we had in front of us is it comes down to simply a binary decision. You had a bunch of banks that took extraordinary risks in derivatives that they didn't fully understand, that were based on subprime loans that the government was encouraging more people to take. And it was a house of cards that eventually was figured out that it was on a false foundation, and the banks lost so much money on this that it threatened the viability of our financial system and therefore the economic health of the world. Not only the United States, but the world. So you're left with this binary decision. Do you bail them out and reward bad behavior and give them an incentive then to do more bad stuff? Or do you let the market take over and let them fail at the expense of possibly causing a global depression that would take a decade to get out of? How do you make the decision between that? And I will tell you that sitting at the table, there were a lot of smart people. So in order to make those public policy decisions, you don't have to be a Christian. But the Christians that were at the table brought a much needed and different perspective on it. And in the end, history is what it is, and we decided that it was worth keeping the world out of a global depression, that fewer people would be hurt that way than it would be to bail out the bad players. And so that's how that decision ended up being made. But there were multiple points through this whole process that required a certain moral clarity, that not having faith will only give you 2 out of 3 dimensions before making a decision. And so I was thankful to have other Christians who were not only very smart in this area, but didn't keep their faith in a box, but instead integrated their faith into what they were doing, and as a result, added value through those very, very difficult conversations. So let me finish with one last story. As Mint Director, I had a little pet project, and what you see is that coin in back of me, and it's known as the St. Gaudens Double Eagle. And this will show you another dimension, how faith can come into public service. This coin was originally created in 1909, and it was the pet project of President Theodore Roosevelt, who was a closet coin collector. And he collaborated with someone outside the United States Mint, and his name was Augustus St. Gaudens. Augustus St. Gaudens was probably the most famous and the most philosophical of all the American artists of the time. And he mainly was a sculptor, but he was trying to figure out, what does uniquely American sculpture look like as compared to European sculpture, which was compared to Asian sculpture, which was compared to African sculpture. So he was thinking through, and at the same time, Roosevelt was thinking through, what does uniquely American coinage look like? Being a coin collector, he believed that coins were an extension of a country's identity. And if you look at all the coins that we had at that time, which were basically a ruler on the front and a bunch of symbols about the state in the back, these were in essence European coins that had its roots going back to the Italian Renaissance. So Roosevelt's thought was, America's been around for over 125 years now, and maybe it's time that we had coinage that reflects America and what its values were. And so he went to Augustus St. Gaudens saying, I know you're thinking about the same thing because I admire your works. I want you to start redesigning our coins. And the double eagle, which is a $20 gold piece, and the eagle, which is a $10 gold piece, were 2 works that came out of it before he died. The reason why this is important and where the faith component comes into it is when you take a look at the design on my right, you'll see Liberty in full figure. That's compared to the headshot side profile of a European coin. So automatically, by looking at this, there's no other coin like it. So automatically, it's distinguishing itself from its European counterparts. Second, when you take a look at Liberty, she is wearing a Greek-Roman gown. And so St. Gaudens' statement was the roots of liberty, the philosophical roots of liberty come from Western civilization. They don't come from anywhere else. She's also carrying a torch in the front and an olive branch in the back. So, she's marching like this. And there's a reason why the torch is in front and the olive branch is in back. What St. Gaudens was arguing was what America believed in 1906 was that where the torch goes, which if you were a Christian, you would believe that the torch represented God, the lamp of God that went between the sacrificed animals. That was a very common symbol for God, was the torch. The secularists co-opted the torch and called it enlightenment. And so this has a double meaning. Where God precedes liberty, or where enlightenment precedes liberty, and liberty follows, then peace will come to that country. Further, you can't see because I'm blocking it a bit, but she is climbing up a very steep So what St. Gaudens was also saying was, liberty has visited the United States and now is marching forcefully into the rest of the world. And so he pioneered a method of sculpture called high relief, which is on this coin. You see how liberty really pops out. Well, the original coin design had liberty so popping out of the coin that it was impractical for regular circulation because it wouldn't stack. But St. Gaudens' point was, liberty was now it's been to the United States, is now marching into the rest of the world, right into you, the rest of the world, each of you individually. And that's the ethos of the United States at that point in time. And then in the back, what you see is a young bald eagle before its white starts, and it's flying over a sunrise. The symbolism of that is America's a young country at the very beginning of its day. So I dredged up this as a coin that I believe Americans ought to be reacquainted with, because it reconnects us with the faith and the public service aspect that was prevalent at the turn of the millennium, of the last millennium. And this ended up becoming the best-selling coin in the United States Mint's history. But to me, it represented much more than just a commercial opportunity. It represented a chance to reacquaint Americans with the values that founded our country. So with that, let me just close, because I think I've at least taken up about half an hour now, and we have plenty of time for Q&A, which I really enjoy. For those of you who want to reach out to me, there are several ways you can do it. I collect all my op-eds and media interviews on edmoy.com. You can write to me directly at ed@edmoy.com. That's my email. I also have a Twitter, which I try to stay active every day on, at Edmund C. Moy. And then I'm also on LinkedIn in case you want to reach out to me that way. But those are some ways that we can carry on our conversation from this moment on. So let me just stop here, because that's a lot to digest, and open it up to any questions that you might have. I know that you've been writing questions down. Please finish writing those questions, and if you haven't passed them to this direction so that Heidi can grab them, please do so.
So as you're looking at you're thinking about what to ask, your comment about the lamp and the branch makes me think of the Psalm, thy word is a lamp unto my feet, light unto my path. So yeah, that really resonates. The one question I have for you, Ed, is why is it that the dollar coins never seem to catch on here in the United States?
Yeah. So I think there's a good management principle behind dollar coins. Dollar coins have been used in every single major developed country. Canada is one. It started off with the loonie, which is a $1 nickname for the one Canadian dollar coin. Then the toonie, which is the $2 Canadian coin. New Zealand has gone to high denomination coins, roughly the $1 and $5. Japan has a high denomination coin. Australia has a high denomination coin, and they've all worked in those countries. The reason why countries end up going in that direction is that what they find over time, it costs a lot of money to replace bills. And so a bill's average time in circulation, given the normal velocity of money, how much it's being used, is somewhere between 12 and 14 months. It costs 4 cents to make a bill. It costs 20 cents to make a dollar coin. So you say, well, gosh, how does that math add up? Well, a dollar coin lasts for 40 to 50 years in normal circulation, whereas a bill only lasts 12 to 14 months. Do the math. It doesn't take long before dollar coins can save our country a lot of money. And so if you go completely over to a dollar coin, there are roughly 9 billion $1 bills in circulation now. You could end up saving taxpayers $500 million a year for the rest of the United States history, having dollar coins. So, getting back to the question, why isn't it adopted? In the United States, unlike all the other countries, which basically said, we're going to get rid of our low denomination bill, substitute it with a high denomination coin, and get rid of our low denomination coin as part of physical currency reform, We have said, we're going to keep the dollar bill and we're going to offer the dollar coin side by side and let consumers choose. We as consumers are very used to using bills instead of dollar coins, and so it's been a very, very hard row. Now, one little innovation that I did when I was at Mint Director was to say, hey, listen, no one is going to buy a flat screen TV from Best Buy using $1,000 coins, but neither are they going to use $1,000 bills either. They're going to use a credit card. So what we need to do is focus, instead of getting Americans to substitute dollar bills for dollar coins, we need to take a look at dollar coin-intensive transactions like vending machines and Subway. So when you put a $20 bill on a Subway for a $2 fare, there's no technology that spits out $18 of bills. So you end up getting, 4 quarters times 18, and it's like you won a slot machine. It'd be far more efficient and better for people to receive dollar coins, which is what the New York subway system ended up doing. And they ended up buying $10 million coins from us every month because it was so useful to them. So they're limited application, but it's hard because it's a choice and Americans are creatures of habit.
Thanks, Ed. So I've got a couple of penny questions.
Okay.
So I'm sure you've heard this before, but I've got a couple in the audience who want to know what your opinion is on the role of the penny. Should it be continued to be minted?
Yes. So Morley Safer asked me this on 60 Minutes in a very famous interview. So if you kind of Google 60 Minutes, you'll find that was the second most watched segment of 60 Minutes in its history. I'm proud to say that after it, I'm one of the few people that they interviewed that didn't need a lawyer after the interview was done. So I kept myself out of jail. But the short answer to that question is the penny today costs about 1.7 cents to make, and we produced about 8 billion pennies. So that means that, so here's how the business model works. When the Federal Reserve orders currency from us, especially coins, they pay us the face value. For a penny, they pay us a penny for a penny, and if the penny costs us 1.7 cents, we're going into the hole 0.7 cents for every penny. You make 8 billion pennies, that's $56 million we go in the hole on. So you think, that's really bad for America. Absolutely, that's bad for America. But I made $1 billion coins during my time each year as director of the Mint. A dollar coin costs us 20 cents to make. The Federal Reserve pays us $1. I make 80 cents per every dollar coin. Multiply it times $1 billion coins, you get $800 million of profit from that. And as a result, you can absorb a $56 million loss. So overall, the taxpayers are still coming out way ahead, given how quarters and dimes and nickels are all accounted for. So saying that, the Constitution gives Congress the right to regulate our currency, which means the penny can only disappear with 2 methods. Method number 1, Congress passes a law to get rid of the penny. Congress can't pass a law to pass a budget. They're not going to get around to passing a law, getting rid of the penny, and doing any type of currency reform. Option number 2. In America, there's been about 200 coins at various stages of our country's history. I bet you didn't know we had a 2-cent piece and a 3-cent piece and a half dime, etc. All those aren't in circulation anymore. They weren't gotten rid of by Congress passing a law. They were gotten rid of because of eventual disuse in the market. People use fewer and fewer because they're more inconvenient. And as a result, the Mint doesn't have to make as many replacements. And over time, that shrinks and shrinks and shrinks until people think they're collector's items. They pull them all out of the marketplace, and voila, the Mint doesn't have to make any more. That's how most coins disappear. Now, saying that, people would argue that getting rid of the penny ends up bringing $56 million back into the Treasury that we're losing. And my argument is, I'm glad you care about $56 million. If we were to convert 100% to dollar coins, we'd be putting $500 million in the Treasury. Should we be focusing on high value things for the taxpayer? And number 2, especially in our economy right now, believe it or not, a lot of people are very dependent on that penny. Charities are very dependent on that. You go to McDonald's and there's that little change thing right in front. When you're a construction worker, living from paycheck to paycheck, and you go and you buy something that's 96 cents, you want that 4 cents returned because every penny counts. And so right now, the reason why the mint continues to make pennies is the market, meaning people, our citizens, continue to use pennies, and therefore we need to make more pennies when they need to be replaced.
All right. Who knew that about the penny? That's really remarkable. So I've got 3 questions here that are similar. Let me see if I can integrate these. These questions talk about the most challenging part of your work, the hardest thing you had to do. How did your faith make an example during this hard time at the White House? And can you describe a specific challenge that tested your integrity?
Yep. All right. So if I can remember all so the first 2 I can answer kind of in one illustration. So what was hardest and how did I maintain my faith through this all? So what was really hard was what I was doing, my church did not understand. So I would basically leave for work in the morning and get there around between 5:30 in the morning and 6:30 in the morning, and I wouldn't come home until 11 o'clock at night, sometimes midnight or 1 o'clock, and I'd survive on 3.5 or 4 hours sleep, and I would do it 7 days a week for the first 4 months of the administration. And then we started getting Sunday mornings off. And then eventually, after we hit our major goal of being the fastest staffed administration in history, in September, we started getting all-day Sunday off. That is extremely demanding work schedule, making some very critical decisions. And during that time, I was put on our church's care and concern list because they were worried about me being a workaholic. And they were encouraging me to have work-life balance. My counter is, this is just the same as Nehemiah rebuilding the city walls. One moment he was working as a part of the Secret Service to the king's detail, and then the next minute he was a building contractor in the Middle East where they blow up and attack all these construction all the time, and he worked 24-hour shifts. He had 3 8-hour shifts, and he supervised them all during the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. And so that there are seasons, and I'm not advocating workaholism. And far too many people in Washington claim workaholism as a badge of honor. But there are some times, like what I was doing, presidential personnel, when one president leaves, they take all their appointees with them, and the government is headless. And it was my job to put the head back on, not in the 4th year, but within the 1st year. And that required me to work really hard. And so one of the most difficult things is I had very little support from my traditional Christian support network. As a matter of fact, I got criticism for it. So then we ended up early on in the transition, starting to pray. So when you're working all those hours and see the pressure that we're all under, it's easy to crumple if you don't have the Lord. And so for us, it was very simple to observe who else were Christians. So we made a compact and we started praying every day on how God would use us should we be fortunate enough to follow the president into the White House. And we decided, because all of us had the similar experience of very little support, we would provide a support network within the White House for Christians. And so we formed the White House Christian Fellowship. And how we started it was a expository Bible study that went through a book at a time. And each of us led it because a lot of times we'd be talking, for example, in the post 9/11 and the run-up to our invasion to Afghanistan, we needed a place to talk about whether we support a war, a just war, and what were all the various theories and where a Christian should be in all that. And we needed a safe place to discuss it because all that was classified at the time because no one could know. So I couldn't even talk to my wife about that stuff. So the White House Christian Fellowship was a chance for all of us to mutually encourage each other. We also, because we were on a confidential server, it was my intent to put every person who wanted to come, to put them on a public email list, on a distribution list. So I didn't blind carbon copy. Everybody who claimed to be a believer were put on this list, and when this list was sent out every week to remind them that the study was going to be at noon on Thursday, they saw who the other believers were, and there was a sentinel effect that held us accountable to each other for how we behaved and how we decided and what we recommended and what our thought processes were during our public service. And that was extremely critical to what we were doing. And just as an end note to that, one of the blessings to me was we started off, and just to give you a perspective, there are about 400 political appointees that come and go with every president in the White House. And we started off with about 20 people coming to the White House Christian Fellowship. It quickly went up to 100. From there, the Catholics wanted to start their own group, so I blessed them, and they started one on Tuesdays. So eventually we had a Bible study every day of the week at every shift. So we even had a third shift group for all the people who worked in the Situation Room so that they would have a chance to have fellowship and encouragement and accountability during their service at the White House. And then a number of people from the cabinet departments started saying, oh, we want to come. You know, it'd be really cool to go to the White House Bible study. So we invited them under one condition. After you started coming, you have to start a Bible study group in your cabinet department. And soon after, by the end of the administration, in addition to the 9 Bible studies that were going on at the White House, there were 47 other Bible studies going on in all the cabinet departments and independent agencies, of which I met with the leaders of those Bible study groups once a quarter to just kind of coordinate and make sure that we're all doing the Lord's work. You just never know where this stuff is going to go. And even people today tell me they might have come to the fellowship twice a year, but how God spoke to them during that time, and that altered something that they were able to do that made a positive impact during their public service.
What kinds of entry-level jobs in the government might recent college graduates pursue?
So government jobs, there are 4.5 million people that are employed by the federal government, and 2.5 million of those are part of our defense system, both civilian and military. Then that leaves 2 million in the civil service. And out of those 2 million, they all eventually report to a political appointee, which are the 4,000 that I talked about. So the two types of positions that you can get into government service on is one is through the career civil service, and that's where you apply to the basic level jobs, and you start off as a GS-7, and hopefully after 30 years you work your way up to a GS-15 or a senior executive service member. And then, so that's one track. You're in charge of implementing policy, but not making policy. That is the purview of whoever's elected president and his agents, which are the political appointees. So in our form of government, every career person eventually reports to a political appointee, whether it's the cabinet secretary or the deputy secretary, the assistant secretaries, the deputy assistant secretaries, all pyramids up to various political appointees. So the second way that you can get in is through the political appointments process, which I was instrumental in for 5.5 years at the White House. That is a low percentage thing for an entry-level person, because you're looked at for providing leadership for all the career people. And so as a result, we're looking for policy experts that have had experience and extensive expertise in the areas that they're going to manage. And so as a result, we're looking for someone who's been around for a while and is very seasoned. But there are lower level political appointments, but here's the rub. there are briefcase carriers and speech writers and special assistants and et cetera to cabinet secretaries, to the head of OSHA and so on, that are fairly entry-level political appointments. So out of those, maybe 2,500 positions out of 4,000 can be those entry-level political appointments. We had roughly 500,000 qualified resumes competing for those 2,500 jobs. So what that also means is they're very, very competitive, and your chances of getting them are very, very small. And so, so on one hand, you can go career civil service, where your chances of getting in are fairly high, but your chances of having a tremendous amount of influence is fairly low. Or you can become a political appointee with high-level influence, but a very, very small chance of getting in. Those are the two ways, entry level, that you can get in.
Thank you. Will the world, or at least major countries, ever convert to one universal currency? Why or why not?
Yep. So the world was under one universal currency for about 2,700 years, from about roughly 700 BC all the way through roughly 1933. And that was the gold standard. So countries had their own currency, so they called it the franc, the dollar, the yen, etc. But they were all based on a certain amount of gold that was equivalent to a certain amount of their currency. And so gold was the global currency. Interesting to note, from the modern gold standard, from roughly 1880 to 1913, can you guess how much inflation there was during the greatest period of economic development in our world's history? 0.1% a year. So the world enjoyed all this prosperity during that time. Now, currencies are what's called fiat currency, which is, they've gone off the gold standard. They're called fiat currencies because of the roots of the word fiat are by order. So the government tells you that a dollar bill is worth $1, not because it's worth $1 in gold. It's because of legal tender. By law, you have to accept it as $1. And so we've been free-floating beginning in 1933, but completely in 1971 to our present day. And there's been a lot of buzz about Bitcoin, which I've been fascinated about, and I've gotten really involved in that particular community, in that Bitcoin acts as a global currency, because one Bitcoin is worth one Bitcoin in Russia as it is in the United States, as it is in South America. So there's a lot of interest in whether or not this or some other cryptocurrency or some other next generation technology will end up becoming a more global currency, because right now there's a lot of friction, especially in our global economy, because if you want to buy Russian oil from Europe, you have to exchange your euros into rubles to end up buying, and there's an exchange rate of which middlemen take money off that exchange rate, and to transfer that money from Europe to Russia using the proprietary financial highways that banks or money transfer agents or credit card companies have built, which charge tolls for companies to use them, that takes a long time. So if you're trying to transfer money from here to your family in El Salvador using Western Union, transfer $100, expect to pay $25 in transfer fees, and have that take up to a week. Transfer the equivalent of $100 in Bitcoin, that can be in El Salvador in 3 seconds, and then they have to convert that Bitcoin, find some exchange to convert it from the Bitcoin into Salvadoran dollars. Right now, El Salvador is dollarized, so it's actually $1. But anyway, I don't know of when there's going to be a global currency, but there's certainly, with the internationalization of the global economy, there's potential for it, and things like Bitcoin are going to accelerate consideration in that area.
You described Christian colleges Christian colleagues, providing a unique perspective in the midst of the financial crisis. Can you elaborate with a specific example?
Yes, so in particular, when you take a look at the global, the potential of a global depression, you have to realize, Ben Bernanke was a White House colleague of mine. He was head of the Council of Economic Advisors when I was in presidential personnel, so we saw each other in the daily White House senior staff meeting. And he is one of the 5 noted experts on the Depression. And there's a couple of theories about the Depression, and one of them was because of the gold standard. When it came time to stimulate the economy, so give you like a 1-minute windup. Herbert Hoover was a free market guy for the most part. And he basically said, banks did bad things, let them fail. They'll go out of business, their good assets will be sold to good banks, and good banks will grow and substitute. It'll be painful for a short period of time, but everything's going to end up being stronger. That was the argument. After 2 years of trying that, the people weren't feeling that, and Roosevelt ran, saying, forget about that austerity stuff. What we really need to do is stimulate the economy. And so what I'm going to do is pour a lot of money. I'm going to create government jobs to build bridges, the Works Project. I'm going to create this New Deal that includes Social Security and all this other stuff. He gets into office and realizes if we're on a gold standard, I can't print any more money than I have gold for, so I don't have any money to do stimulus programs. And so hence, from Ben Bernanke's view, the Depression was, its impact was extended because of the government's inability to stimulate the economy. Now, what Roosevelt ended up doing was, at that time there was monetary gold, so that $20 gold piece, I have one up here, $20 gold piece was because gold was worth $20 an ounce. So you put 1 ounce of gold in a coin, this coin was worth $20. What he did was he signed an executive order asking all Americans, forcing all Americans to turn in their monetary gold and get a $20 bill in exchange. And overnight, so much gold came in, he could print 3 times our monetary base in new currency. And that's where he started funding the New Deal and funding the IMF and the World Bank and a number of other institutions for international economic stability. So what that meant was America eventually came out of the Depression, but it's unclear whether or not the stimulus dollars did it or whether or not World War II and funding in the military-industrial complex did it. But Ben's paper, if you read his dissertation on this and his teachings, would argue that Hoover's approach hurt. And so as part of the moral arguments that are going back and forth is, do you reward bad behavior of a few people or do you make a lot of other people poorer and more miserable because of that? And so it really came down to a very human issue here, and that is the risk of the negative consequences of a world depression and the length of time that it would take to get out of that was far too large of risk. And by doing a stimulus plan through quantitative easing and zero interest rates would be the least risky way of going forward. Now, saying that, we knew that there were going to be multiple problems that came from this other thing, which we're still dealing with today, but it came down to human misery and what the recovery rate would be.
We've got time for a couple more questions. Which areas of public service do you think will become the most critical for Christians over the next generation?
All of them. It doesn't matter whether you're in labor policy or national security or our agricultural policy. All these areas need an influx because, in my observation, Christians are by far the infinitesimal minority in all these public service positions. our debate and our integrity in making those decisions and our ability to perform have been severely hampered because Christians have basically vacated politics because it's too dirty. And in the vacuum, other people who have a different set of priorities and a different set of moral principles have filled in the gap. And Christians need to get more involved in public policy, just like they need to do more involvement in the entertainment industry, as well as in the law profession and advertising in particular. If you feel a call to ministry in the workplace, that is a very high calling indeed.
Yeah, this is a liberal arts institution, so I've got to ask you this question. It seems we still use the European coin models. Did St. Gaudens fail then, and could this change?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes, so we continue to have traditionally European designs on coins. Some of that changed, but it's really perspective and not symbolic meaning. So if you look at all the presidential dollar coins, one of the things that we've done there is it is a quarter turn of the face, so it's not a total side profile. So again, indicating that this is a uniquely American coin because no other coin done anywhere else in the world has a quarter turn like that. Now, we initially did the quarter turn, but for good symbolic reasons, with the Jefferson nickel. So if you remember at Jefferson's anniversary, they did, on his purchase of the Louisiana Purchase, we came out with a nickel that had Jefferson, instead of a side profile, kind of facing part forward like that. And the symbolism behind that was Jefferson was forward-looking when he did this deal. You know, and whereas some of us said it's serendipity or it's by accident that this ended up becoming a huge benefit to the United States, Jefferson really carefully thought through all of that. And so as a result, our artist said the best way to portray him is with this quarter turn. So I think a lot more work needs to be done on the symbolism of our coins because it's one piece of art that every single American ends up using regardless of how rich or how poor you are. You can be Bill Gates, and I guarantee you that Bill Gates or the person standing right behind him that pays for his transactions has cash in their pocket. And I also guarantee you that the poorest person who's unemployed and homeless and broke is begging, and there are coins inside their cup. Everybody in the United States gets to see this, and part of my tenure at the Mint was to get Americans to rekindle their relationship with coins again.
Final question. Please describe George W. Bush's leadership style in the White House and share a humorous interaction you had with him.
There are many. The first part of that question was?
What's his leadership style?
Leadership style. So George Bush is he is an executive from the Harvard MBA School of Thinking. So he's very results-oriented. He's very metrics-oriented. He's very much into accountability. And so when I had meetings with him, we were expected to be really prepared. We gave him briefing books before. He would study them the night before, make his own phone calls so we could have a dialogue. He didn't want a recitation of what was in the briefing book. He wanted to have an active debate about what was right and wrong and the consequences, et cetera. And in the end, he was driven toward making decisions. So I'll tell an anecdote that is a little out of school, and but it'll illustrate the point. So one of my first meetings when Secretary Geithner became the Treasury Secretary was on redirecting some TARP money from the General Motors to union pension funds. And there's some latitude in the law in order to do that. And in a change of administration, this will show you different management styles. They went around the table, and the Obama appointees, which were the majority, were all, talking about how good this would be and how necessary and how they need to make the decision. And it came to me to make a comment, and Secretary Geithner says, Ed, I know you're from the other side of the aisle, but you're sort of probably against this. And I said, sir, a new sheriff's in town. My job is to implement administration policy. The administration's changed. And so if this is what you all want to do, that's your decision. Because the person who appointed me is no longer there, but it wasn't a George Bush appointment. I'm a presidential appointment, and there's just a different president now. But this is one thing that I would suggest. Number one, when is that money going to be transferred? Who's going to be responsible for doing it? What are the milestones to determine whether or not it's done right? How will we know that it made it into the account and is being used properly by the union, et cetera, et cetera? And so I just went through a whole list of George Bush questions. And they looked at me like I just tooted in the room, right? And they were going like, who brought this crazy guy here? A couple months later, we had a meeting where Secretary Geithner comes in and says, I basically got chewed out by the head of the union saying, where's that money? We decided on that. All of us decided. And I'm going, well, you needed to ask people to do it, right? It's one thing to arrive at your policy decision, but it's another thing to develop an implementation plan and get that done. George Bush was very driven toward what was the principle, what was the, number one, what was the right thing for America? Number two, what were the principles that decided what were the right things? Number three, once we made the decision, what was the plan to get it done? And then how we're going to make sure that we made the right decision in retrospect by seeing whether or not it had the desired impact. Which again, when you take a look at his decision on the surge, it was, okay, we've done this. It ain't working. We need a new strategy. And all his advisors said, no, but he said, this is the fact. Things aren't going well, and so we need to try something new. And so therefore, again, he's results driven, and it was a real pleasure working for him. Funny things. So so I'll tell you two funny related stories. One was during the month of May, which is Asian Heritage Month, in 2001, I was in a presidential personnel meeting with the president, and the buzzer rings. And his personal secretary says, Mr. President, Dr. Rice needs to see you right away. And he says, send her on in. She comes walking in into the Oval Office, and she says, is everyone here, a certain clearance? And we all said, yes, we are. She said, Mr. President, I want to give you a heads up that about 20 minutes ago, some Chinese fighters forced one of our Air Force jets down on an island in China, off the coast of China, and we don't know what the status of the crew is, and so on. And so she did her 3-minute brief and left the office after saying, once we get more updates, I'll let you know. So it went from a really engaged meeting to we're still having the meeting, we're still presenting things to the president, but you can just tell that his mind was someplace else. And all of a sudden, he realizes that our minds are all someplace else, and he needs some way to break the tension. So he looks directly at me, and he goes, Eddie. And I sit straight up in my desk, go, yes, Mr. President. And at the time, I was wearing some wild socks like this, and he looks at me and goes, strong statement on those socks today, Eddie. Everyone starts laughing in the meeting, tension broken. We went on to have a very productive meeting. So to follow that up, here's another inside story that I've never told before. About a year later, 2 years later, so the president picks out certain quirks that his staff has, and that kind of is his handle to kind of needle you whenever you need to be needled. And so mine was always the way I dressed, and in particular my socks. And so the president has what's called, at least Bush did, is what's called policy time, staff time, which whenever he was in town, we would try to schedule half an hour unscheduled where certain staff who had clearance to go see him, we could see him without an appointment. And we just waited, first come, first serve. And the only requirement was that we would tell the chief of staff what we were going to see the president for. And then when we left the Oval, we'd stop in and tell the chief of staff what the president decided. That was the only criteria. So we're all waiting, and it's Larry Lindsay, who is our head of the National Economic Council, Margaret Spellings, who was head of domestic policy, who eventually became the Secretary of Education, me, and some others. And we're just all standing in line right outside the Oval Office door waiting to come in. And the entrance to the private secretary's office, in comes Jim Baker, the former Secretary of State under George H.W. Bush. Very elegant patrician guy, and he comes in, and when he sits down, he's in direct line of sight to the president, who's finishing up a meeting with a staffer, and the president looks up and he goes, "Hey, Jimmy." And, Baker goes, "Mr. President," and so they see each other. The president finishes up with his meeting, comes walking out, and we're standing, witnessing history. President walks out of the Oval Office. Jim Baker gets out of his chair. They walk, and they shake hands, and he goes, "Jimmy, do you know my team here? This is Larry Lindsay, head of the National Economic Council. This is Margaret Spellings, domestic policy. This is Eddie Moy, presidential personnel." And then he stops, and he goes, "Eddie, show Jimmy your socks." So I feign, I go, "Oh, Mr. President," And the president goes, "No, Jimmy, you got to see this." And the president gets down on his knees, and Jim Baker follows him, gets down on his knees. They lift up my pant leg, and Baker's going, "Well, I never." They get up, they go in, and basically Baker was there because the president sent him on a mission to talk to all the banks that Iraq owed money to try to get them to get easier terms or forgive some of the debt. And so, so it's interesting, sitting at the door of the Oval Office listening to Jim Baker debrief the president. And they were all done. Jim Baker walks out of the office, and the president goes, "Larry, get in here." So Larry goes in. We all kind of move down one. Baker's walking right by me, and without looking at me, he stops and he goes, "Eddie, I'll always remember those socks." Makes it out. One funny comment that Jim Baker said. So when he first came down and sat down, all of us were just kind of in awe because I didn't know him. I'd never been this close in person to him. So we're making small talk. I said, "Mr. Secretary, now that you've been out of office for so long, what things are the same and what things are different?" And he looks at me and goes, "Well, Ed, some things are still the same. When I flew here, I still had a car and driver. But my car is yellow, and my driver speaks Farsi."
On that happy note, let's thank Mr. Moy.